Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be ranking all 81 brawlers in the game right now, from the very worst all the way up to the very best. So as you guys know, there's been a bunch of meta shifts. There's some broken brawlers in the meta still, and everything is just quite chaotic right now, especially if you play a lot of ladders. So hopefully this tier list will help you understand who is really good in the meta and whatever else. But just quickly, there's something I want to share with you guys over on the Tribe Gaming YouTube channel. Recently, OJ, Ben, and Wasim attempted the impossible and took part in a 5-day streaming event called Mission Galaxy Mastery Mayhem. They were all trapped inside Star Park, and the only way out was to complete 26 Brawler Masteries using the beautiful Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. It truly was a legendary live stream where so many funny moments happened.
Proclaim everyone can drink soda and drive.
Bro definitely had his cereal in the morning.
With my favorite moment coming from the real life Primo, elbow dropping everybody. And if you happen to miss this amazing event, you can head over to the Tribe Gaming YouTube channel, where there's a dedicated video highlighting all the most epic moments. But also you can catch up with the action on the live tab with hours and hours of endless entertainment. So make sure to check the link in the description below to check out and catch up on this amazing event. But not only that, I'll put another link in the description for the all new Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra, which helped power Mastery Mayhem and all of these amazing ideas that are coming from the Tribe Gaming YouTube channel. And the device itself is capable of so many amazing things, so make sure to check it out. Quickly, before we get into the ranking, make sure you're subscribed if you're not already to this channel. There's no better channel out there for meta breakdowns and all of tips, guides, whatever you need is right here on this channel. So let's dive into it. So at the F tier, start off one of the worst brawlers in the game, Doug, easily. So Doug can actually be underrated in a few scenarios on grassy maps and maybe some cheesy strategies in knockout, but there's just always a better option. So dropping down to the F tier, we have Janet. So she received a small damage buff. It was like 1%. It did nothing because the meta brawlers are so tanky and she just quite simply can't keep up. So again, remaining in the F tier, we have Daryl. So you'd be sad if you're a Daryl main, because brawlers like Meg, Frank, Lily, all of these brawlers, they're getting reworks, but Daryl's just being left behind. There's just far better brawlers that outclass him mechanically and stat wise. He's just terrible. And lastly, in the F tier, we have our Milky Boy Hank. So we'll actually say there are a few use cases for Hank. I think he's underrated, but when you just play him on ladder and whatever else, he just gets wrecked. Sadly, he's probably F tier. So now we're going to be moving on to the D tier brawlers. So I feel like the D tier brawlers haven't really changed whatsoever. There wasn't a lot of love to a lot of the worst brawlers in the game, and we're going to start off with Maisie. I know she received a buff, but there was only one interaction that changed, and I don't think that really changes how she is in the meta. I will say that she's okay in a Frank meta, but at the same time, Frank uses anti-stun, so I don't think Maisie's that good, and she remains in the D tier. Next up in D tier, we have Squeak. So again, the meta around him is actually getting even worse. He doesn't have the DPS to keep up. Everybody can run all over him, so he remains in the D tier. So dropping down the tier, we have Grom. So I did say with my last tier list, I actually wanted to put him in the D tier, and he's easily in D tier, maybe even towards the F tier, because you can't really use Grom unless you literally get the right composition. Against bad players, easy to hit shots. Good players can juke it easily, and he's just such an easy brawler to counter with just pure aggression. You can counter Grom. Next in D tier, we have Penny. She received no balances, even though she's quite clearly one of the most underwhelming brawlers in the game. There's sometimes a use case for her in like Hot Zone, but I just think she's even terrible at the low trophy ranges, so she just sucks. Next in D tier, we have Tara. So again, another brawler that's been suffering, hasn't received any buffs, and you just think other lane brawlers have received hyper charges as well, like Gale, like Ems, so she's just falling behind even more. She doesn't have the damage to keep up with a tank meta. Next in D tier, we have Mr. P. So he's not changed whatsoever. He's still really bad. If anything, he's got worse because of Frank, Lily, Meg, all of his high HP brawlers. He can't deal with it. He hasn't got the damage. The rework did help him out a little bit countering the sniper meta, but the meta's changed now. Next up in the D tier, we have Mortis. So it seemed to give him tiny little buffs every update, but again, I think there's just far too many assassins in the meta that simply outclass him mechanically. Think of Melody, Lily, for example. They're just far better. Next up in the D tier, we have Bulls. So Bulls hypercharge can be really good in heist, and it can be a somewhat soft counter to brawlers like Frank, but again, he's just often outclassed and just outranged. Next up in the D tier, we have Bo. So he's really fallen from grace. About 6 months ago, he was like the best brawler in the game with a big damage buff, but again, with Bo, he only becomes meta when his stats are over buff, so maybe there's some type of rework that might be coming. Next up in the D tier, we have Bonnie. So she received a really nice buff about 3 months ago, which makes it just she only takes 3 shots to get super, but again, I just think she's far too outclassed. In one of her best game modes, heist, everyone can just run all over her because they have the hypercharge or whatever else, so she's just falling behind because of the hypercharge meta. And lastly in the D tier, we have the trash can Ash. So he's not got better better whatsoever because one of his best counters in Frank just destroys him, so he can't even move in this meta. So now we're going to be moving on to the C tier. So these are often brawlers that are actually pretty good in the right scenario, really only good as like a counter or maybe as a good option if other brawlers are banned out in ranked, etc, etc. So we're going to be starting off in the C tier. So this is not really in an order, but we're going to be starting off with Eve. So I think Eve has been dramatically getting worse and worse in the meta. I don't even really want to use her in maps where there's a lot of water, like out in the open, like Bridge to Far, because there's just still these hypercharged brawlers. Yeah, you can defend and be decent for the most of the game, but if there's just one hypercharge, it just destroys everything. So yeah, Eve doesn't really have a place right now. Next up in the C tier, we have El Primo. So he's bumped up one tier only because he's an okay counter to Frank. I still feel like Frank, since the rework, just absolutely destroys him most of the time in a 1v1, but at least he has a bit more of a place. Next up in the C tier, we have Lou. So again, it's a very tanky meta, so I might often find him right now that Lou is one of the best solutions to counter these tanks because he's still got a really good hypercharge, and of course his super just destroys the tanks. So if anything, he might even be closer to the B tier. So next up in the C tier, we have Miko. So I would say he's kind of in a balanced state right now. He's only good as a late pick to counter snipers and throwers in the draft stage. He can be good in knockout, but then you just consider compositions like Kit or just other healer compositions. Miko can't really keep up with this high tanky meta. Next up in the C tier, we have Edgar. So again, the meta really isn't suiting Edgar right now. There's too many tanky options. There's too many brawlers with stuns, hypercharges that can just push Edgar away. So unfortunately, he remains in a C tier. Next up in the C tier, we have Willow. So I always like Willow in the meta. Main reason being is because at least she can defend herself against aggro with the gadget and the super. But we'll say since the barley buff and the introduction of Berry, there's just less usefulness about her. Next up in the C tier, we have Sam. So Sam, a good Sam player, can just do so much on the map. But a lot of times, there's still a lot of like hypercharged brawlers, especially like Gale, for example, that has came out that just destroy him too much. And eventually, you're going to get overwhelmed by these hypercharges. But a good Sam player, like second best, will destroy everyone. Next up in the C tier, we have Gus. So ever since they've reworked his super to have a built-in knockback, it's got a little bit better, but at the same time, I still feel like because of his low DPS, he can still get countered too easy. Next up in the C tier, we have Tick. So I feel like Tick is very overrated, especially for the casual player. It takes forever to cycle through to his hypercharge, and all you need is some aggression, especially with this meta, to just completely overwhelm a Tick. Next up in the C tier, we have Spike. So since the damage nerf, he's just been getting completely overwhelmed, especially in the lanes as well. All of these tanks can just run through Spike right now. So next up in the C tier, we have Pam. So she's always pretty underrated in the meta, but her main use case is in hot zone, especially with the mythic gear. She's just unkillable in that zone, so she'll always be a good brawler there. Next up in the C tier, we have Otis. So unfortunately, there's just far better tank counters out there. He is an underrated pick on a lot of grassy maps with the vision gear, but again, there's just better options that can shut down tanks a lot more aggressively. Next up in the C tier, we have Dynamite. So we'll say he's an underrated counter to the likes of Frank, but Lily, Meg, all of these other hyper aggressive brawlers just overwhelm him too easily. He's a good late pick in ranked, especially with his hypercharge. He can do a lot of work, but I just see my randoms pick Dynamite way too much when he's so easy to counter. Next up in the C tier, we have Jackie. So we'll say she's really good in Brawl and good with some cheesy compositions right now, but again, top brawlers in the meta like Colette, Frank can counter Jackie a little bit too easy. Next up in the C tier, we have Fang. So his place in the meta hasn't changed whatsoever. He can be good in an isolated 1v1 versus snipers, but we'll say he's just far outclassed right now. His hypercharge takes so long to charge up, and I don't even see my randoms play Fang, so that's when you know he's bad. Next up in C tier, we have M. So she recently got a hypercharge, and for me, it's just plain and simple terrible, and it takes forever to cycle through to it, and still M's as a tank counter doesn't actually deal that much damage. I'd rather go like a Surge, I'd rather go a Colette, Cordelius. She just doesn't really counter tanks. Next up in C tier, we have Crow. So we'll say he's kind of borderline B tier right now, mainly because of how good he is in Heist, and his hypercharge still sometimes can make a good impact, but for me, he's still far too squishy in normal form, far too unreliable in terms of damage, and people can still overwhelm a Crow since the constant nerfs to his gadget. Next up in the C tier, we have B. So I feel like this meta suits her a tiny bit more, mainly because if there's a lot of Frank on ladder, the map's going to be completely opened up where B can excel. B's always been a good synergy brawler with Frank, but outside from that, I just feel like she's far too outclassed by a lot of tank counters out there. And lastly, in the C tier, we have Brock. So So he received 2 buffs to his hypercharge, and it literally did nothing. His normal super still probably is better than his hypercharge super. Not only that, I feel like he's outclassed in a lot of game modes right now, like Knockout Bounty, where he used to be really good on. He's only really good in Heist, and he's only good in Heist when other brawlers like Cole, 8-Bit Piper are picked. So he's just okay. So now we're going to be moving on to the B tiers. So these are brawlers that are pretty consistent across the board. They are really good in a couple of game modes, or just solid against the meta in general. And we're going to start off with Clancy pretty quickly. So Clancy, I've not had too much to really try him out. I'd actually say personally, from what I've seen, probably towards the C tier. I feel like he's going to be really unreliable in terms of DPS, but he's got a really high damage super. So I just want to briefly mention that, but again, I'm not really going to count it in the tier list. But we're going to be starting off with Stu. So Stu right now is really suffering in the meta. You think the top 3 brawlers are pretty much super tanky brawlers, and he can't really do anything against them. He's only really good in hot zone. I still feel like the hot zone meta, it's just too much for him right now. So I think B tier is probably fair. Next up in the B tier, we have Pearl. So we'll say this is another brawler that is forever underrated. Literally for months now, I've been telling you guys to play a lot more Pearl in Bounty and Knockout. She's one of the best counters to kit because of the super and just the DPS overall, because in those game modes you can build up heat so easily and you can't push into a Pearl. She deals so much damage. Next up in the B tier, we have Chuck. So of course he's one of the best brawlers in Heist. Absolutely, he'll always be done broken in that game mode. He's also got a few other use cases. For example, in parallel plays, I've seen him in competitive and he can be pretty good, but we'll say it's really isolated incidents where Chuck is good. So B tier is fair. So next up in the B tier, we have Sprout. So if you played a lot of ladder, you will probably think that Sprout's near enough an F tier brawler because he gets countered by a lot of different brawlers. But if you play a lot of ranked, where the meta is a lot more suited to him, especially as a late pick, he's really strong. Bounty, Knockout, he's really good, and his hypercharge in Heist is pretty good as well in the Heist save. So I just think B tier is fair. So next up in the B tier, we have Griff. So he's worked his way from the C tier to the B tier mainly because of Frank and all of these tanks in the meta. It's going to help Griff a lot more, and especially opening up the map can be a great counter to brawlers like Frank. So next up in the B tier, we have Barley. So he's recently received a hypercharge. Sometimes it can take a little while to cycle through to it, but I've been really enjoying Barley in the meta. The map pool is also changing to favor him a little bit more, so I'm liking Barley. Next up in the B tier, we have Nanny. So Nanny's always going to be a consistent pick, but since the damage nerf, it's turned her down a little bit. Could even be towards the C tier, but she'll always be good because she's one of the best counters to other sharpshooters. So you think of Bounty and Knockout, she'll always be pretty much an S tier pick there. Next up in the B tier, we have Ruffs. So Ruffs will always again be pretty underrated. The casual play base do not like playing Ruffs whatsoever, but he's got good damage as a lane brawler. He's just really good at supporting, breaking open the map, and just giving you and your teammates so many treats that you can just run over the opponents eventually with the additional damage and health. Next up in the B tier, we have Shelly. So again, it's a tank meta, so Shelly's going to be even better. I was telling you guys already that she was super underrated, and this definitely is a strong meta for her. I will say a lot of the times though, there's just a little bit better options out there that are more consistent, but on a grassy map, she'll just absolutely destroy. So next up in the B tier, we have Gray. So I'm starting to kind of see over the past few months now, Gray is starting to decline. It could even be towards the C tier. I'm not really seeing him too much, even in like gem grab as a mid as I used to see him. I used to always see him in hot zone with cheesy strategies. They're still there sometimes, so he's kind of enabling the cheese, but I don't really see him too often in Knockout as well. There's just normally a better option out there, so I'm not really seeing him picked. So next up in the B tier, we have Lola. I feel like she's infinitely stuck in the B tier, but she's just pretty consistent, always underrated as well. She just does a lot of damage, especially in the tanky meta, but she's just pretty consistent. A lot of different game modes. Heist, you got hot zone, you got gem grab as a gem carrier. She's just Mrs. Versatile. So next up in the B tier, we have Poco. So Poco is loving this meta. A lot of tanks in the meta. Poco's of course going to get even better, but I still feel like the tanks are just good without him, so that's probably why he's not been pushed up even more. But he's still really good in hot zone, for example, and a good other cheesy scenarios. So next up in the B tier, we have Leon. So Leon is actually pretty good. I feel like I've underrated him, especially with smoke trails. I've been having a lot more joy with him. I would say it takes a little bit longer than usual to build up his hypercharge since the nerfs a couple of months ago, but he's still pretty versatile and you can go him in a lot of different scenarios. So next up in the B tier, we have Carl. So Carl will forever be a good late pick. I think since the damage buff a couple of months ago, people have always been sleeping on him. I think there are a few meta brawlers that do counter him though, unfortunately, so B tier is fair. Next up in the B tier, we have 8-Bit. So I'm starting to see 8-Bit a lot more in competitive right now. Again, you know, people have been underrating him in Heist, for example, for a long time. He's starting to reappear there, and now I'm seeing him a lot more in a lot of cheesy strategies. For example, I've been seeing him in Bounty, where people just pair him with like a Mandy or a Sniper and a Thrower, and as soon as you gain the lead in Bounty, it's like impossible to push into an 8-bit, especially with a booster star power, so he's pretty good. Next up in the B tier, we have Colt. So of course, he's absolutely S tier in Heist, and he's just okay in a lot of other scenarios, can be really good at countering certain compositions with his breakthrough gadget, and just overall, if you're a good Colt, you can always shred since the damage buff ages ago. Next up in the B tier, we have BB. So BB, since the hypercharge, has just been pretty consistent across the board. Once she cycles through to a hypercharge, which is very quick, she can cause a lot of pressure, especially with the stat boost, with the shield, and the additional speed, and the bubbles just create chaos around the map. I will say a few of the meta brawlers do counter her quite a fair bit, but I always find a use case for BB. Next up in the B tier, we have Rosa. So the map pool really favored her last season with like Sneaky Field and all of these grassy maps. She was starting to become really strong, but now since the introduction of a few brawlers in the meta, Frank and Gale, etc., I think she's just gone a little bit worse. So next up in the B tier, we have Mandy. You'll be glad to hear that she's finally back in the meta. I've been absolutely loving playing Mandy at the moment, and I've been hating facing off against Mandy players. I feel like there's so many good Mandy players out there for whatever reason, and it's just creating chaos in Knockout, Bounty, and I'm actually starting to see more use case for in like Heist and other scenarios, so I think Mandy's pretty good in this meta. And lastly, in the B tier, you'll be glad to hear that Chester is actually a competitively viable brawler again. He received a rework to his Bella Mania star power, and now his damage output is just really good. I think I've had a 100% win rate with him in ranked. I'm not even joking. I personally would put him in the A tier, but for now, until we get more competitive data, I think B tier is pretty fair. So now we're going to be moving on to the A tier. So often these brawlers are just the best pick in so many different scenarios, and we're going to be starting off with Rico. So recently he received a hypercharge, which is very, very strong. Sometimes it can be hit or miss, but if you get the right one, you can team wipe and just deal so much damage. Also, they nerfed his multiple launcher gadget damage a little bit, but I still find he just hyper counters some tanky options like Kit, Edgar, and any brawler that wants to jump on him, so he's always going to be a good pick. So next up in the A tier, we have Jean. So Jean's still a consistent pick, still really good in gem grab, knockout, and bounty. I will say, because there's a few more tanks in the meta, he just doesn't have the DPS to fully deal with it on his own, but he's just good across the board. So next up in the A tier, we still have Surge. So there was a brief period where his star power didn't even work, so he probably was like F tier for a couple of days, but now since that's been fixed, he still is a really good brawler, and again, really underrated in a tank meta. You think of Lily, he can be pretty good with his gadget to tank some damage and his super to stun Lily, and he's just good against fellow tanks as well on grassy maps. I think Surge is a good option. So next up, still in the A tier, we have Charlie. So she received 2 nerfs to the spider gadget and her main attack damage, and she's still such a meta option. The super itself is just absolutely broken, especially at countering tanks, and she's just so versatile with her range and her damage output. So A tier is still fine for her. So next up in the A tier, we have Gale. So Gale, since the hypercharge release, has been really good. You pair him with the stun star power with his hypercharge, and he just deletes the map. But also, there's been some bugs. There was a bug previously which was fixed, and then I think there's another bug where his super pretty much has double the projectile. So I think whilst that bug is still around, I probably would put him towards the S tier. Just counters tanks so easily, and 2.4k damage with super is absolutely crazy. So whilst he has the bug, I would push him. So next up in the A tier, we have Belle. So we'll say she's struggling a little bit in the meta, but she's still such a good option in so many scenarios. I will say though, she's probably borderline B tier, mainly because there's just better snipers really out there, but I still find myself going a lot of Belle in Heist, just any open map, because still the super can be a good counter to tanks, especially because you just deal more damage to them and your slows are pretty good. So next up, still in the A tier, we have Buzz. So I think Buzz with the hypercharge is just such a menace on the map. He can cycle through multiple hypercharges in a game, which allows him to become Spider Buzz and create so many plays in Heist, Hot Zone. He's a good shutdown to a lot of low DPS compositions, and you've always got to be wary of the Buzz. Next up in the A tier, we have RT. So since the rework to his gadget, he's just found his foot in the meta again. Main reason being is because if you're scared of facing off against Kit or like Lily, for example, you can't really go aggro onto an RT. He's literally unpushable, because with a click of a button, he can just turn into his split form and then spam out attacks and delete pretty much half of the brawlers in the game. So for that reason, he's so good in so many scenarios. Next up in the A tier, we have Larry and Lori. So they're still a consistent pick in the meta. They're just pretty good everywhere. You think of knockout and bounty, of course, being a thrower, they're going to be good at countering so many compositions. Their super is still pretty good against tanks and just can save them, especially with the gadget. I just think there's just so much to them. They've got to remain A tier. Next up in the A tier, we still have Buster, so nothing is really stopping him from becoming an absolutely crazy strong brawler in the game right now. You've also got his super, which is really good against a few of the meta brawlers like Meg, for example. All of those projectiles, Buster can be pretty good against that, and a good Buster player will always make a big impact on the map. You think of Knockout and Bounty can be really good down the lane with his gadget, pulling people closer. You think of Hot Zone, he can get so much pressure because it takes so long for people to pinch him, especially with the super pushing him back as well. I think Buster's great. Next up, remaining in the A tier, we have Jessie. So if anything, she's got a little bit better in the meta because there's just so many tanks in the meta, so she can counter them and just charge her hypercharge like crazy. The, of course, 10k HP turret's gonna be so good in Hot Zone and pushing opponents back, so A tier is fair. So next up in the A tier, we have Nita. So she did receive a nerf to her hypercharge rate, which I'm very surprised about because it takes 2 supers to get a hypercharge, which is crazy. Although Bruce might not deal a lot of damage to the opponents, he wastes so much ammo. And you think of really grassy maps like Retina, she just absolutely destroys people. And she's actually a great counter to some meta brawlers like Draco, for example. So Nita, A tier is fair. So next up in the A tier, we have Cordelia. So he's dropped a little bit. Main reason being, you've guessed it, the top brawlers, Meg and Frank, are just too good against Cordelius right now. But he's still such a great counter pick to a lot of the other assassins and tanks in the game, so still a solid option. Next up in the A tier, we have Amber. So she's always borderline S tier, A tier. I think A tier is always going to be fine for her. She's got a gadget that deals so much damage. She's got another gadget that can be really good against snipers. And then you just think of Amber. She's played so much competitive in Hot Zone, Gem Grab, Brawl Ball, even Knockout sometimes. She's just always a great pick. So next up in the A tier, we have Piper. So she's borderline S tier. The hypercharge is actually really good. It makes her into pretty much an assassin, jumping onto people, knocking them back. But we'll say good players have already found a good counter to Piper, and the knockback is just simply stand next to a wall and you won't be pushed back too far. But again, she's still pretty good, and the hypercharge damage buff is pretty good. And lastly, in the A tier, we have Sandy. So he received a big nerf to his hypercharge rate, which means he just won't be able to cycle through them as quickly. And a lot of the top meta brawlers right now, like Frank and just all of them, he doesn't have the damage to keep up with them, but at least he gets some free supers, so he's still an A tier brawler. Okay, so now we're going to be moving on to the S tier brawlers. So these are literally easily some of the best brawlers in the game. They're going to be good everywhere and just have some broken strategies with them. So starting off with Barry, I think Barry's easily an S tier brawler. I will say though, if you're playing a lot of ladder, he does get wrecked by the top meta brawlers like Frank and Lily, but because of how broken they are, you sometimes got to ignore them a little bit, because Barry's a standalone brawler is so good. His main attack stays on the ground for 6 seconds, which is insane control. And of course, he gets his super from healing up teammates and even healing up himself. So a lot of times you can just throw a puddle on the ground, heal up yourself, build up your super, go in, create so much chaos. I think he's easily S tier. Next up in the S tier, we have Max. So another brawler I'm surprised I've seen no nerfs with the last set of balance changes. Max hypercharge is still way too good, offers so much value, and for that reason, absolutely S tier. Again, in the casual player base, you won't really find Max to be that strong, probably around B tier, but competitively speaking, Max counters so many compositions, also synergizes with so many compositions. The hypercharge is strong, easily S tier. So next up in the S tier, we have Kit. So Kit received a nerf to the showdown style power, but they just completely forgot about 3 versus 3. Kit, just before the balance changes, was just crazy. I watched monthly finals the other weekend, and Kit was everywhere with so many cheese compositions, even on like shooting star. I was seeing Kit everywhere. The reason why Kit is so good is because of the damage buff, which was a couple of months ago, but just changed so many interactions. And of course, the cheesy synergy with just any brawler. The amount of healing that Kit provides is just astronomical. Knockout, Bounty, so many cheesy strategies with Melody, Miko, Mortis, Draco, Frank. Oh, so many assassins that Kit compare well with. I don't know, Kit's just so strong. So next up in the S tier, we have Byron. So Byron is still absolutely busted in his meta. The damage buff that we received a couple of months ago is just broken with heal compositions with like Draco Kit, for example, where that's just been running wild in the knockout meta. And in competitive, he's like always one of the top 5 most used brawlers because he's just so versatile everywhere. And it's just the fact that he cycles through super so quickly, which can allow him to counter some of his counters. brawlers. So Byron is just indestructible in this meta. So next up in the S tier, we have Draco. So we'll briefly say I've not really put the S tier brawlers in any order because all of them are pretty good, but it's just pretty hard to judge them against the best 3 brawlers, which we'll jump into. But Draco is still absolutely insane with the gadget. I will say it's a little bit easily countered by like Frank and Meg, but outside of that, if you play ranked, he's just unbroken. You've got the last stand gadget, which keeps you alive for 2 seconds and then synergizes so well with healer compositions like Byron, Kit, for example. But not only that, the healing style power shredding, which allows him to just cheat the 1 HP cheesiness. Again, Draco's just so good because of the pressure that he can put on the team, and he just pretty much has unlimited ammo, so he's easily S tier. So next up in the S tier, we have Colette, and a brawler that has received no buffs except for the most broken brawlers in the meta. Colette is the only escape from them, so she is our savior right now. She's been used everywhere. Literally, if you play ladder, there's just Frank, Lily everywhere, and Colette's good because of course Colette just rips through a Frank, especially with the push it style power. Good into Lily as well, because at least you can push Lily away. You've got a cheesy gadget that can just keep you alive in so many scenarios, and the hypercharge just absolutely shreds through everything. I'm playing Colette everywhere right now, and she's easily a top 10 brawler. So next up in the S tier, we have Melody. So we'll say I thought the HP nerf would have done a little bit more to her. 1000 HP, that's quite a substantial nerf, but still Melody's still insanely good because you've got 3 supers that can just deal so much control and versatility in terms of pressure. And then of course her notes still have a lot of damage. She's still got a shield gadget, and she's just still broken against those squishier brawlers because she has so much HP, which allows her to just get on top of them so easily. Melody's still insane. So the final brawler in the S tier, we have Angelo. So he received 2 nerfs, one to his supercharge rate, taking 2 maximum charge hits to 3 hits, which actually did a lot. I've been feeling that nerf a lot more, and then the damage nerf from like 4,400 to 4,000. So 2 big nerfs, but it's still Angelo. Mechanically, he's still insane, still super fast, still his super is really good, and now he's received a hypercharge buff. It's still pretty hard to get the hypercharge, but still, just adding that buff for whatever reason has just still kept Angelo as an S tier brawler. Easily still S tier. So now we're going to be moving on to the broken tier. So this is the first time in a while that I've introduced this tier, because I think these 3 brawlers are just so much more clear than all of the other brawlers in the meta. There's 3 broken ones, so at least if you're playing ranked, hopefully your team can ban these 3, and then you'll actually have a fun meta. So starting off with Frank. Frank is just busted. He received a nerf yesterday, and that literally did nothing to him, I would say, because he can just still deal insane amounts of damage. Imagine any brawler, right, that has low DPS. You spend so long chipping Frank down, and then he gets to like 3,000 HP, and then he could just spam auto aim 3 times and delete you. Just non-existent. And then you've got the power grab, star power, because he's getting a lot more kills now, which is making him deal like 3.7k damage per attack. And then you've got the hypercharge that just cycles so quickly with 7 attacks needed to cycle through to it, which is insane. He's just completely broken right now. I'm seeing him using knockout and bounty, like shooting star, for example, in competitive. He's just unbroken. The thing I will say, he is counterable still in a lot of ways by like Colette and other top meta brawlers, but he's still busted. So now moving into the second best brawler in the game right now, I went with Meg, and I was really debating her putting her number 1. People talk about Lily, Frank, but Meg is just broken right now. So strong in competitive. Everybody's either using her or banning her straight away. Main reason being she received 2 nerfs, one to the main attack damage and the range, but then she received the HP nerf and double the projectile. So if you get within striking distance of any opponent, they are dead within a couple of pieces of ammo. She rips through everything, and then of course because she shoots double the projectiles, that means she of course builds up her super double as fast, and then she can just swipe to add that DPS as well. And of course, being so tanky, it's just so hard to take down a Meg in this meta. Trust me, she's done broken. I don't know how she didn't receive a nerf. Alright guys, so now moving into the best brawler in the game right now, we have Lily. I feel like there shouldn't really be many debates about this one because she's done broken. So she received a couple of nerfs yesterday, which I don't think really impacted her. Well, it made her like dumb broken to just broken. So at least it toned her down a little bit, but still I think she's absolutely insane and just better than everyone else. So if you didn't know, she received a rework, so she has 2 pieces of ammo instead of 1. The reason why this broke her, of course, it's doubling her DPS, and in a 1v1 you just can't kill her. And then like I said before, her gadget is absolutely broken. I've said this since I released. They shouldn't release this gadget because it's way too strong. You can use it aggressively to just cause mayhem. The way I like to use it is like to super onto an opponent, kill them, and if I'm in any trouble whatsoever, just pop your gadget. You know, if there's a Shelly super in your face, pop your gadget. Frank stun incoming, pop your gadget. Any big damage, pop your gadget and run. It's so cheesy. 4 chances to do that is broken. And of course, the combination dealing 6.3k damage with the damage star power, super and 2 attacks. It just combos and just deletes every single brawler inside of the game right now. She's done broken. A lot of HP as well, above 8,000. So when she teleports onto someone, it doesn't matter because she's just so tanky. There's hardly anyone that can deal with her. So I think easily the best brawler in the game right now. So that's going to be it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know who you think are the best brawlers in the game. Here's the tier list on your screen again. If you share this anywhere, make sure to at least credit me, even if you just say my name. Hopefully you can just put the YouTube link as well. But I think this is a really accurate list for how long I've played. For like a week, I've been playing a ton of ranked, and I think quite easily you can't debate the best 3 brawlers in the game. That's all I'm going to say. So that's going to be it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time.